Well, good morning. My name is Willie Lawson. This is the Morning Report. The Morning Report is a production of fightbackmedia.com, 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 and fightbackmediatv.com. Trust that you are well today on this Patriot Today. Since 2001, this particular program has always been easily the most difficult for me to do. This was a day that started out like every other day. It was a beautiful, clear day, and it was just a work day. And I was working at a local high school, and I was late getting in. And when I walked into the building, there was a young man, student who was in a part of the school, and I was wondering, class was in, why were you out in the hallway? And he said, well, I had to get out of that. I had to get out of there. My teacher has gone crazy, he said to me. And I said, and that's Stacy Bell yelling. And I said, what was going on? And because I was that kind of that kind of dude in the school. And he said, didn't you hear? And I said, no, I didn't hear anything. And he said that a plane crashed into a building in New York. And I was like, what do you mean? Some plane crashed into a building. And in my brain, I thought that some, Cessna 172 had hit a building in New York, had got off course, and some pilot error had caused, something that was fairly insignificant to happen. Because, we just couldn't even imagine. We couldn't, really fathom that anything significant had happened. A plane hit a building. Okay. So buildings are very large. You could have planes that are fairly small, like a Cessna 152 or 172, hit a building. Kind of what I thought. Anyway, I sent him on his way. He went back to class or wherever he went. I don't know where he went really. And I made the left down the first hallway, and then a left into the first classroom, which was a chorus room. And my friend, Bev Sutherland, we miss her. She passed away from cancer recently. And she was standing there and in front of the TV about, I don't know, 6 to 7 feet from the television, watching it, just staring. And I walked up on her, and she didn't know I was there. And I saw on the TV screen this giant gaping hole in one of the towers. And I thought, well, okay, it wasn't a 172, it was a jetliner. And as she noticed me standing there, she kind of looked at me, kind of bewildered. And then just as we turned back to the screen is when we saw the second plane hit the second tower. I was like, yo. Because after the first plane hit the tower, you thought you still kind of hope, because we are those people. We're sort of entitled, and we couldn't imagine that anybody would attack us in that way. That it was an accident, a horrible, scary, terrible, tragic accident, but an accident, until the second plane hit the second tower. And then we knew something was up. We didn't want to admit it to ourselves right then. Nobody wanted to say anything. And all we said was, what is happening? Because minutes after that, we heard about a third plane that had hit the Pentagon. And I think just minutes after that, we heard about the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. And we thought, oh my God, what is going on? We are under attack. I don't think either of us said that, but we both knew something horrific was wrong. And the scary part is we didn't know how widespread it was. Were planes just going to start dropping out of the sky in every major city? But nobody knew. And here where we live, not far from a pretty important Air Force base, MacDill Air Force Base. That's where CENTCOM is, right? And it was pretty frightening. Um, And President Bush stopped all air traffic, which was later on kind of one of the eeriest parts of the whole week. And we thought, what's going on here? Are we going to find out who's responsible? But I'm telling you, I knew where I was, I knew what I was doing, and it was scary. As the day went on, parents were showing up, signing their kids out of school. Where that school was, we had a lot of military families who were getting their kids, and you might say, what good was it to take your kid out of school at that point? Well, I'll tell you what. And people just, and if you didn't experience any of this, if you're too young to experience it, people just wanted to be close to their families at that point. Parents just wanted their kids with them. They just wanted their children with them. They just felt better with their kids. So people were coming and getting their kids. We knew that we were going to end the school day early, and did, and sent as many kids home as possible. Uh, it was awful. It was awful, absolutely awful. Um, I remember I was supposed to teach saxophone flute that day, and I got a text message saying that we were that where I was teaching was going to be closed. We were not going to be open, which made a lot of sense to me. So I was able to go get my son, who was like in fifth grade. I said, no, and it's the day before his birthday. Tomorrow was his birthday. Um, so I went by the school. He was at a small Christian school. So I went by to pick him up, and the difference between what they did at that school, Separate Christian Academy, what they did at that school, they didn't let the kids watch TV all afternoon with the news reports. They protected them and left the job of telling what happened to the parents. To this day, I appreciate that. But he'd seen teachers who were crying, who were upset. He saw a lot of parents come get a lot of his classmates early. People were upset, people were crying, and when I came and got him, he got in the car, and we started down the street to go home. And he asked me, "Dad, what happened?" And I said, "Some very bad people did um, crash some planes into the Twin Towers in New York, and a lot of people were killed." He was like, "Oh." My kid's always been that thoughtful guy. It wasn't like, oh, like, and who cares? It was, oh, like he was trying to process it. And which was interesting because we were all trying to process it. Who? And I said, at that point, we didn't know. I don't know. No. Are they still doing it? I think he asked me some follow up question, and I said no. I think that part's over. No. So what's going on now? And I said right now nothing. Um, both of those towers collapsed. They fell down, and a lot more people got hurt. Hmm. And he said I knew something bad had happened because a lot of people were crying, was telling me about his day, and we just talked a little bit, not much, not too much detail, and we came home. And a few minutes later, his mom came home. My wife came home, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, not a lot. He did end up seeing over the next couple of days the footage, because we didn't want him to see that, because it was terrible. And there was, later on we all saw footage of people jumping out off the building, or jumping out of the building. And we all learned later that all those folks who were in the towers before they collapsed, above where the planes went in, there was no way they were ever getting out. They were going to die, and if they weren't killed, immediately, they were going to die. And we have the horror of actually seeing it happen. I am on my podcast, the Willie Lawson show that was on Blog Talk Radio for years. I had found a piece of 911 audio of a man calling 911, and 911 was instructed, once they found out where the person was, they were instructed to just keep them on the phone and make sure those folks didn't feel like they were alone, like they hadn't been, like they hadn't been deserted, because we knew their fate. So I had this 911 footage or audio of this man calling, asking where was the fire department, who was coming, why weren't they there yet. A lot of people were in his office, and the smoke was bad, and something had to be done really soon. And well, long story short, the operator stayed on the phone with that gentleman, and you could actually hear in the audio, and I'm not going to play it. I can't even listen to it anymore. I listened to it solid for about 10 years, um, until I got to the point where I couldn't hear it anymore. It changed me, because you can hear when the tower that this gentleman was in collapsed, and you can hear him scream, and you knew that that was the moment that he died. He died this horrific death. Yeah, he got to the point where I would play that audio every 9/11 show, and I couldn't listen to it. I could see that it was playing, I could see that it was broadcasting, but I couldn't listen to it again. I'd heard it a number of times, and I had it memorized. I had it memorized all the way to the point where the tower collapsed, and you can hear him yell. Um, so, whatever your political persuasion is, no matter whatever your thought on how and why it all happened, what I know that day, that man died. I heard it. I heard him die, and the 911 operator also heard him die. The 911 operators heard a lot of people die that day, knowing full well they couldn't do anything about it. It was very hard. It was very hard. It's used the meowing. That's the cat. That's the co-host of the morning report, TC Bell. So this behind me was part of the aftermath. When those towers came down, it wasn't just the people who were on the top of the towers. It was these kind of folks who were at the bottom, the rescue people trying to help people, that these towers fell on top of. And all the debris and the dust, um, it wasn't just the thousands of people that were murdered that day. It was a continuous murder of people catching all sorts of cancers. A lot of these folks died of some cancer, some infection later, some right away, some years later. That murder continued. But I tell you what, let me tell you something. The the connection from one American to the other Was absolutely like no time. I can personally remember. I can't remember a time where Americans were closer. Where sometimes you'd just be in a grocery store and everything was so quiet. People were so quiet. People weren't talking and laughing and stuff. It was, even as far south here as in Florida, everybody knew someone who was affected, and we all knew that it wasn't an attack on New York. It was an attack on me. It was an attack on you. It was an attack on our nation, and there wasn't anything we could do about it. So there was this anger, there was this fear, there was this solemnity, the solemnness, sadness, and it was on all of us. So what we decided to do was support each other in whatever way we could. I remember being in the Publix grocery store in line, and there were a number of people in line, and all we could do was look at each other, smile. Some of the men shook hands, sort of grabbed hands. When you hold somebody's hand, you squeeze it and you look at them and go, "It's gonna be okay." Now this happened, and we were total strangers. We didn't know each other, and I didn't meet those people beforehand, and I've not seen them since. And I've not seen them since. So it was, but there was a togetherness, a tightness that we have not had since. It's always a shame when you're that close together that that people have to be brought together with such pain and such tragedy through such violence. But we were. For a week, we were the most united people that I'd ever seen. Strangers, black, white, Asian, Native American, whatever. We were all American. There were no hyphenated Americans that week. There was no such thing as an African American or an Asian American or a Polish. We were just Americans. It's the only part of that time that I long for. If we could just do that again, how much could we accomplish? All right. There's a couple of things that we need to talk about connected to Patriots Day and 9/11, and we'll do that, TC and I, right after this break. We'll be back.
This is Tim Bryce with my column titled, "Where Does the Hate Come From?" Last week it was pointed out to me that most of the protests over coronavirus shutdowns in Democrat-controlled states were by Republicans, particularly in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. Critics thought the protesters were being unreasonable in combating the virus and hateful towards the government. As Democrats have said when they protest, this is nothing more than a First Amendment right of the people to peaceably assemble. Yes, they are upset with the governors in terms of wanting to reopen the state so they can go back to work, but this is far from being offensive. What I find particularly hateful and vicious is the discourse from Democrats emanating from Twitter, the popular social media platform. Recently, I discovered several hashtag accounts representing some rather nasty people, to wit. First, we have the group Republicans Are Destroying America. One user contended, quote, "Where is the racist group GOP? Oh, that's right. They don't give a crap because they agree with and enable a racist, lying, xenophobic, corrupt reality TV figure. Kudos, GOP. You are a stain on America," end quote. And this was one of the nicer entries. Then there's the group called Republicans for Biden. Interestingly, most people in this group fail to identify themselves. I therefore suspect it is a fraud perpetrated by someone else. Next, we have the group Republicans Virus. This is basically used to blame the GOP for the devastation of the COVID-19 panic. Next, we have Republicans Are Killing Us, another forum to blame Republicans for the virus. Then we have GOP Corruption Over Country. A lot of nasty accusations here. Then we have GOP Genocide. Here again, the GOP is painted as baby killers. Trump lies, people die. More accusations of incompetence and carelessness. And finally, we have Not My President. More name-calling, including deplorables, and finger-pointing. The hate from these groups is massive and unimaginable. Frankly, I was surprised that nobody was reprimanded by Twitter for their tongue. Interestingly, I earnestly sought out Republican counterparts to these groups using words such as those shown above, along with others. The closest thing I could find was Democrats, the enemy within, which includes accusations of wrongdoing, but without the venom. And then we have Democrats Hate America, which is pretty much the same thing. This was all I could find in this regard. This either means Republicans are either more civil in their discourse, or perhaps this is another instance of censorship by social media to favor Democrats. Keep in mind, this is but one social media. There are many others also producing such venom. The hate spewed forward by the Democrats is reckless and scary. However, if they are trying to intimidate the Republicans, I think their rhetoric is backfiring on them, as it is forcing Republicans closer together as opposed to scaring them off. All of this hints at the problems people have with the Trump derangement syndrome, or TDS. At first, I thought this to be a joke, but now I'm convinced it is a legitimate problem. How do you know you have TDS? Well, to paraphrase comedian Jeff Foxworthy, you might have Trump derangement syndrome if you blame the president for everything. You believe Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer only have the best interests of the country in mind. You see nothing wrong with the shenanigans of Antifa. Or you believe AOC is a brilliant intellectual. You might have Trump derangement syndrome if you think it's time to replace the Constitution with something else. Or you believe socialism should supersede capitalism. Or you believe you are entitled to a plethora of freebies, including education, housing, and so on. You might have Trump derangement syndrome if you still live in the basement of your parents' house. I just wish curing Trump derangement syndrome was as simple as giving everyone a dose of saltpeter. Friends, keep the faith. This is Tim Bryce in Palm Harbor, Florida. Follow me on the internet at timbryce.com.
Welcome back. It is really not my intention to politicize what we just talked about, because it's very, very hard. But I'm going to tell you, you got to wonder. Let me know how you feel in the comments. Because proving again that the president couldn't read a room if it was his only job on earth. The administration notified Congress today on the 22nd anniversary of the terrorist attacks that killed 2,977 innocent people on U.S. soil, that it had signed off on a deal last week to unfreeze, get this amount, $6 billion for the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, Iran, as part of a prisoner swap that saw 5 U.S. citizens freed by the regime in exchange for 5 Iranians in U.S. custody. They get their 5 prisoners back and $6 billion. This is from the Associated Press. The Biden administration has cleared the way for the release of 5 American citizens detained in Iran for issuing a blanket waiver for international banks to transfer $6 billion in frozen Iranian money from South Korea to Qatar without fear of U.S. sanctions. In addition, as part of the deal, the administration has agreed to release 5 Iranian citizens held in the United States. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken signed off on the deal late last week, but Congress was not notified of the decision until today. So according to the notification, which was obtained by the Associated Press, the waiver, of course, is likely to draw criticism of President Joe Biden from Republicans and others that give a damn about the country, that remember 22 years ago that almost 3,000 American citizens were killed in a terrorist act. And now, 22 years later, like ain't nothing happened. Like ain't nothing happened. The United States is basically setting the stage for the release of 5 Iranian prisoners and $6 billion back to the one of the largest state sponsors of terrorism, responsible for the death of almost 3,000 Americans here on U.S. soil. Not only is the deal a massive payday of needed resources for the normally pariah status regime in Tehran, and it is utterly an asinine deal that only furthers incentives Iran and its proxies to continue, or incentivizes Iran and its proxies to continue targeting U.S. citizens for abduction and detention. The Biden administration's deal sends a dangerous message directly to Iran and its tyrannical regime. Each U.S. citizen held captive by Iran is worth more than one Iranian citizen held in the U.S., plus some $1.2 billion. As was reported at the end of August, a letter from House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise, and the House Republican Conference Chair Elise Stefanik demanded answers from the president about an apparent nuclear understanding with Iran that involved this hostage swap and payday for the regime in what the Republican lawmakers say is a violation of the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015. Lawmakers expressed the significant concern that they have with recent reports about Iran's activities, and that the Biden administration's deal with the regime. Specifically, Iran has reportedly diluted a small amount of 60% enriched uranium in recent weeks and slowed the rate at which it is accumulating new material, which coincided with reports of the deal for Iran to release 5 American hostages in exchange for several Iranian prisoners and access to at least $6 billion in frozen Iranian assets held in South Korea, and potentially billions more held in Iraq. Taken together, this strongly suggests that your administration has contemporaneously brokered a $6 million prisoner deal and a nuclear understanding with the regime that are inextricably linked. The letter from lawmakers explained this would be a clear violation of your administration's legal obligation under the Iranian Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, which requires you to submit any agreement related to the nuclear program of Iran acquiring U.S. action, regardless of whatever form it takes, whether a political commitment or otherwise, and regardless of whether it is legally binding or not, to Congress for formal review within 5 days. So it didn't matter if they were just making a deal, blowing smoke, whatever. They have to submit that within 5 days, and that hasn't happened. That story will continue, and we will continue it. That is hard to believe. I mean, and on the day. Anyway, we got one more story. Republican presidential candidate and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis called on President Biden to declassify the remaining 9/11 documents after a visit with families at Ground Zero in New York today. Casey and I have the honor of joining with families who still bear the scars of the 9/11 terror attacks to commemorate the 22nd anniversary of that dark day. We heard their heart-wrenching stories to cherish memories of those they lost, and their strong commitment to never forgetting what happened on this hallowed ground 22 years ago. September 11, 2001 changed those families and our nation forever, DeSantis released in a statement after the visit. And now, decades later, we as a nation still owe full transparency and accountability to those grieving families. Yet, too many politicians have, of course, broken past promises to them, and that is wholly unacceptable. This is what DeSantis says, I call on President Biden to publicly commit to declassifying the remaining intelligence community documents regarding the planning and financing of 9/11, consistent with protecting national security. While over the last 3 years, some progress has been made, a selection of documents and answers remain unclear, he continued. As president, I will demand from each agency that they provide a detailed justification for every remaining redaction and decide in the interest of transparency whether the public interest outweighs any potential harm in disclosure before making declassification and public release decisions. I will end the federal government's decade-long abuse of the classification system and will strive to be the most transparent administration in U.S. history. DeSantis also blasted Biden administration for its handling of the 9/11 mastermind, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and issued support for the families of the 9/11 victims. The pain of 9/11 endures for these families and all of us who remember that day. And its history must be taught for generations to come. Our work is not done until we have fully brought to light the details surrounding the attacks and those responsible are held accountable. I will not rest until both are fully achieved. We must never forget, he concluded. Now, I know there are people who are watching this who are like, what happened? I don't have any idea what you're talking about. And I know you don't, because it happened before you were born. I got it. I got you. But so did the Civil War. Why do you care about that? So did the Revolutionary War. So did Vietnam. All those happened before you were born, but you've got to admit they've had a large effect on your life, as this does. All right. We got to get out of here and make room for somebody else. So listen, thank you ever so much for dropping by the Morning Report. Again, a production of fightbackmedia.com, 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 and fightbackmediatv.com. Until we see you again, go out there and learn something, love somebody, and for goodness sakes, y'all take care of yourself. We will see you when we see you. Bye-bye now.